Hello, we are back with another episode of Everything Historically Inaccurate. For this video, we'll be jumping all the way back to merry old London with Assassin's Creed Syndicate. To be perfectly honest, I wasn't the biggest fan of this game, and we'll go over a few of the reasons why in the next couple of minutes. Set in 1868, we follow the story of the Friar twins, Jacob and Evie. The first two missions are set in the country on the outskirts of London. Evie's mission is the assassination of a real scientist called David Brewster. In the game, he is aiding the enemy, although it seems rather unwillingly. In real life, Brewster was a well-versed scientist who in 1862 responded to Darwin's On the Origins of Species and published an article called The Facts and Fancies of Mr. Darwin. You see, while Brewster was a scientist, he was also a devout Christian, and any theories on evolution was considered a dangerous and degrading speculation. While he accepted Darwin's theory on adaptive changes, he denied any statement of a primordial form. My first thought was, why did this man need to die? Why is killing a scientist a heroic act? Was he just a token historical character thrown at us to make the game more realistic? Especially as a character, he is brushed over and we learn nothing of him before killing him. Once our starter missions are complete, the twins jump onto the train and we make our way to London. So 1868 was the second industrial revolution, with factories thriving, new inventions happening every day and the rapid growth of population. And yet somehow, this is how Assassin's Creed pictured a skyline to look. It would be very unlikely that you could look more than 5 feet ahead of you due to thick smog caused by the factories. It is also very clean. It feels like an extremely glamorised version of what should be a dirty, plague-ridden place. London in Assassin's Creed lacks substance.
It's like ordering a pie and finding it has no filling.
Where are the rats, the grotty streets, the violence, the extreme overcrowding? They have all the bare bones and nothing else to it. In fact, not a lot happened in this particular time period at all. I would have preferred it to be shifted a few years later and have them involved with the suffragette movement, or even go back and go to the Edwardian period. Victorian London is an overused device to draw in a narrative. But moving on, we meet Henry Green, followed by a slug of token historical characters. We literally bump into Charles Dickens, author of A Christmas Carol and Oliver Twist, and also meet Frederick Abberline, who was the lead investigator on the Jack the Ripper case in 1888. One of the overarching plots seems to be the class divides and the violent gangs in lower classes. It almost feels as if the Friars are trying to play Robin Hood. They help the poor and free the child labourers, but what does that actually achieve? One of the quest lines includes Evie freeing children from their dreadful master, but during this period, people work in these terrible conditions simply because they must, not because they're forced to. If you free a child worker, then they and their family will probably starve. The Fry twins seem to want to liberate people with nothing to liberate them to. Assassin's Creed minimalises the nitty-gritty once more, as child labour was a very, very serious issue which caused growth stunts, deformations and even death for a lot of children. It was a big issue that couldn't simply be fixed by sending one factory of children home. We're going to move on slightly and take a look at what they're wearing. I'm a bit confused at the character design of the Fry twins. I understand that assassins dress in a trendy way, but aren't they meant to be inconspicuous? Evie literally sticks out like a sore thumb. In a time period where women are primarily dressed in skirts, dresses and petticoats, a woman wearing trousers was practically unheard of. Not only that, but leather wasn't used as a fabric in garments. Jacob wears a tailored leather jacket, but the first leather jacket wasn't introduced until the early 1900s, which was for military use. In 1928, the leather jacket was then introduced as a fashionable garment by a designer called Irving Scott. Another notable thing is that colour was for the rich. Lower classes and working classes tend to wear very dull colours, tans, greys, maybe even a dark blue, but they'd hardly ever be seen in reds, purples and greens. But your gang, the Rooks, wear a particularly bright shade of emerald green. Shades of green were generally dull in Victorian England until, in 1814, a company in Germany called Wilhelm Dye and White Lead Company developed a new green dye. It was brighter than most traditional green dyes. The colour green then became incredibly popular in Victorian England. Even Queen Victoria herself wore a dress of this colour. Only this particular shade of green was made with arsenic and killed a lot of people during the late 19th century. So while your gang does look trendy in this shade of green, they probably would never have got their hands on it, and would also be very ill and even risk death by wearing it. So after being mostly disappointed by the game, I decided to take a look at the one DLC in particular, and that is of Jack the Ripper. We should all know who he is, but if not, Jack the Ripper was a prolific killer that plagued the streets of London during 1888. His targets were women, and while the police kept on this investigation, they had many leads, but they never caught the killer. In Syndicate, Jack the Ripper is an assassin, a crazed man who was born in Whitechapel and was sent to a mental hospital after the death of his mother. Jacob Fry took him on as an assassin's apprentice, but Jack turned bad and blames Jacob for his mother's death, killing women to lure him out. You could argue that this is an interesting take, and that's because they never found out who the real Jack the Ripper is. It could be anybody. But Assassin's Creed threw away the only vital piece of evidence the police had during this time. It was that whoever Jack the Ripper was, he must have been surgically trained or have a physician background to have been able to extract organs so cleanly. So, I'm calling it there. I could keep on lamenting about how much I would wish they'd played the history side more and gone into more specifics, but there is only so much time in the world. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you when I see you.